I hope everyone clicked the button at the same time, because in case they didn't, the hassle of actually lining the audio tracks up in the correct way would be annoying.
I did have a moment where Audacity needed to confirm that it had access to my microphone because I am on a Mac.
Whatever. Who cares?
So we'll see.
Quality Mac technology.
We'll see how synced I actually am.
I like how Fenio always, he's always, whenever the question of technology comes up, he talks about how good it is that Apple is making products that are harder to repair, but look better. I mean, the capitalism is always bad, except when Apple makes products that just break after 1 year of use and then contribute to massive environmentally polluting landfills, e-waste landfills.
Fenio should also be ignored because he's a fellow staff abuser towards me, and, well, mind you, I signed off on it, but he still abuses me.
Only Fenio abuses you.
Capitalism is responsible for the himboization of technology.
Okay.
That is what Fenno is saying.
It didn't contribute to the himboization of technology. In fact, if anything, technology became more twink-like. If you look at smartphones and
sleek and hairless,
Macs,
yeah, that is where technology is going.
Yeah, when in fact
the twinkification of tech.
Yes,
Steve Jobs' eternal and enduring legacy.
It's technology sissy hypno is what his operation will be called. Because everyone sane actually advocates for easily repairable technology that is modular and more sustainable and bulkier and more environmentally friendly.
Iggy's platform technology also has to be big and square.
It has. It definitely has.
Yeah, I mean, that's also a real problem with, like, farm equipment and things, too, not even just computer stuff.
Yeah, there's, like... I think big tech companies are lobbying for the idea that it's going to be somehow harder to produce all this stuff, and the prices are going to go up, and if the dumb farmer from Arkansas is gonna, like, start digging around in the innards of his tractor, he's going to hurt himself. Well... the answer to this question is, why don't you make a tractor that will not hurt the farmer when you start digging around in its innards? But of course, it's not profitable enough.
This requires too much logic and not enough value capture. That is the essence of capitalism now. You capture the value and then you blame socialists.
Yes. Capitalism these days doesn't really like drive innovation as much as it drives the innovation of ways to sell innovation under the guise of something else.
Is this why you named my clean feed name Dictator Dan, just so you could have a segue about capitalism versus socialism?
No, I named you Dictator Dan because you are a Nazi moderator in our Discord. That's what you are. And,
not yet, but I can be.
I still can't remember if I chose my name on clean feed or not, but I'm a big fan of it.
What is it? I don't think I can't see it from here.
It's Bane Pecco.
It's a VTuber joke.
Yeah.
Very, very important.
I came up with all the names in here.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was my name or like a collective name, but I'm really pleased to know that Operation Whiskey Sour is my name and speaks to my prime directive.
I'm glad to know that Tumen has learned enough about VTubers that he chose the one with the war crimes as the alias joke I get. Fantastic. Like, that's a shout out to every conversation we've ever had about drones in Burger Friends, where people are like, what kind of horrible monster would ever be associated with the use of drones in warfare? You would have to be a morally bankrupt person to ever be supported by drones or launch a drone strike or use them. I'm sitting there in the chat like, gee, thanks guys. Feels real fucking good to be in here right now. A bunch of 15-year-olds that haven't even fired a gun. Fuck me.
Did you we were talking about babies prior to starting the recording. Did you Did you ever had to kick a baby onto a grenade to save your life?
Hold on. We don't need to go this direction.
Why? Why not?
One of my favorite and most one of my favorite and most
we're catering to.
Oh, he'll cut this bit out. Don't be a coward. So
I'm not.
One of my favorite.
This is the world's first and foremost pro-drone warfare MMA podcast. We need to act as such.
Oh dear.
Welcome to Drone Town.
Drone Town.
And just the joke that we continually bring up like every second episode is the one time that Tumen had to raid an enemy encampment and kicked a grenade into an orphanage full of children.
Yeah.
You know, like because sometimes you need to learn how to multitask.
That's why they call me Tumen.
I was about to say that's why they call you Two Drones.
Oh my god!
That's why they call me Tumen. I can both hit the button on the drone to start the drone strike, and also kick a baby down.
We get it. You're special.
Yes, he has the capability of two men. This is,
normally,
I think, the greatest thing I've accomplished.
Normally, you need a squad to do this, but or at least a two-man team.
I don't need a whole squad. I just need two men.
So far, we've managed to fit in. So far, we've managed to fit in like 3 genocide man jokes, which makes me so happy because nobody knows the comic exists, but it's hysterically funny.
I mean, every time I hop onto a podcast, or like, for example, the MMA podcast, Ed always dreads the moment where I start making ethnic cleansing jokes. And I'm allowed to do those jokes because I actually live in a regime that likes ethnic cleansing. And I live near a regime that likes ethnic cleansing.
I'm amazed you haven't just doubled down on it and said, come on, Ed, we all know you Americans have your own version. It's called exclusionary single-family zoning. And just watch Ed's head explode.
Yeah. And I mean, not only that, we could also talk about skyscrapers and places like the Burj Khalifa tower in the United Arab Emirates, and how it's not actually connected to the sewer system, and they have a schedule, like on a schedule they have trucks running through the building to pick up enormous tanks filled with liquidized human shit because it's not connected to the sewer system. But it's the brightest achievement of the modern civilization. The tallest tower.
Sufficient to remake the movie Speed, but with the big giant shit trucks.
Yes, exactly. And also, Mission Impossible should have been about Tom Cruise trying to climb up the tower from the outside to get to the primary truck driver who controls the outpouring of shit that goes around the United Arab Emirates.
I feel like Keanu would so totally
really
act in that movie.
Mission.
Yeah, that's why they call it the dirty bomb. I actually don't remember what the movie actually was about. I think it was about an insane Scandinavian scientist thinking that starting nuclear war will cleanse humanity or something like that.
Well, we've managed to write the plot for half of the Command and Conquer Generals 2 if it ever gets made. Well done, people. What a brainstorming session.
And yeah, the kicker will be the kicker is that it's not the GLI who's going to use the dirty bomb. It's going to be the protagonist who is what's the equivalent of GDI in the Generals games? I forgot.
There isn't really one because, like, America is kind of portrayed as being a bit more isolationist and sane, amusingly. Like, China invades, well, not invades, kind of takes over Europe and half colonizes it and then realizes that's a really bad idea in the second game that they cancelled. Because China's like, oh god, we have no idea how to run a multi-ethnic pluriparty diplomacy. Ah!
Well, I mean, true. They don't know how to do it in real life as well.
Something about kicking babies and grenades, probably. I
mean, that's essentially the equivalent of the approach to all problems. Basically, just kick a grenade on top of it.
Well, we're getting banned from certain figures on Twitter. The block is going to be going up. Look on the right side. We've got 8 minutes for Tumen to realise that this was a catastrophic mismanagement and everyone's got their settings wrong. It'd be fantastic.
Oh.
I will say that I am recording, and honestly, I don't think we could have asked much more from me at this juncture. So, a roaring success on that axis.
I mean, at least, like, unlike most beginner podcasters, you've actually learned how to click the red button. The reason why there aren't as many podcasts as there is now...
Like all idiots, I'm magnetically attracted to a red button.
I mean, yeah.
Shout out to the HH people who still haven't replied to our suggestion to use Audacity, which confirmed.
Don't press it.
Oh, wow. Hey, Civi, I didn't know you were making a guest appearance.
Don't press that button. Press it. Don't press it. Part 5, booby trap the stalemate button.
This should
That's who we actually
be remixed
need.
into an absolutely fire Chemical Brothers song.
Oh, we need Civi to make a guest appearance on TENGRIDOME one day. Like, we need Civi to do it. Just pay, just crowdfund $80,000 and get Steph and Wait to make a guest appearance, and Civi will follow. You won't even need to invite him. He'll just be here.
I mean, if the problem with inviting Sylvie is that she always has this guy.
No. We're not talking about we're not talking about Sylvie. We're talking about a YouTuber Haxx and I watch.
Oh Jesus!
He covers boomer shooter games, and he is even.
He's amazing.
His voice sounds even more like I've checked out of life and hate everything than Dan does after a shift. So it's impressive.
If you're into boomer shooters, I presume you'd have to detach yourself from reality at this point to maintain your sanity.
And he covers some weird fucking games too. So, and just his
play Cruelty Squad, Dan. Play Cruelty Squad. Play Cruelty Squad. You should play Cruelty Squad.
Don't tell me what to do. I have to play my bullshit anime games first.
I'm telling you what to do because you're gonna regret not doing it earlier when you actually play it.
What do you mean I'm gonna regret not doing it? What the hell does that mean?
You're going to play Cruelty Squad and you're going to be like, I should have played this the day it came out. This is incredible. My life is divided into 2 sections, before and after playing Cruelty Squad.
Jesus.
But yeah.
I don't want to play Cruelty Squad.
What's especially funny about the thing that Haxx mentioned, I basically explained how the Heavy Hands boys can fix their own audio issues and all the connectivity issues that they have, and neither of them have read my messages because they never read their messages, and it's probably going to be the reason why Heavy Hands is going to continue having shit audio quality moving forward.
That's probably the real reason that they some of the people were intimidated by you. They heard somebody in high definition for the first time and couldn't process it.
Yeah, that's why.
My God, his voice is so clear and sharp.
That's why they actually had to move to Skype, not because the Discord crashed on Connor's end, and not because his power supply failed during the recording multiple times, but because they were intimidating by the clarity of my voice and my mic.
Wait,
moving to Skype is your high-tech tech solution.
Wait, he doesn't even have a fucking, a PSU setup, like a backup?
No, he doesn't have a backup PSU, and the one he has is 20 years old at this point.
And he doesn't have a surge protector, or
Neither of those things.
Right, so basically it's a miracle that he hasn't gotten cancer by licking dioxins off a fucking electrical box on the road and died or something.
Pretty much, yes. But I mean half the reason why he's into MMA, I think, is predicated on the fact that he is poisoned right now as of this juncture.
He's just spent his whole life licking dioxins, and now it's finally getting to him.
Oh yeah, and he's like, oh, I'm gonna watch MMA. That's a great idea. But yeah, if anyone is still listening to this mess and wondering who the fuck all these people are, welcome to TENGRIDOME episode. Wait, hang on.
I think it's 18.
No, 18 is...
It's 18 or 19.
18 is the episode that I've recorded with Naked Quarry the other day. It's going to be...
It's 19.
It's going to be up on...
So 19, we're going to cut everything before this point just to save our sanity.
Yes, please cut everything before this point and then make it exclusive on Patreon.
Except for Drone Town.
I feel like we shouldn't cut it. I think it adds a lot of character to the nature of this recording and all that. You guys are just cowards. I never cut it.
Adds a lot of reasons for people to block us on Twitter.
That's what I was saying, but nobody ever listens to me, the lone source of reason and cowardice on this team.
We talked about how
leave it all in, unedited. I want Drone Town. I want the shit trucks. I want it all.
We talked about how capitalism is bad, and is the reason behind.
That's a great podcast.
And is the reason behind the shit trucks and the drones and the babies and grenades.
We are never gonna get done with this fucking podcast if you keep talking about fucking drones and kicking babies down a shaft. Can we move
Droids
on?
that kick babies. It's actually a good Star Wars Clone Wars idea.
Imagine if General Grievous only used his limbs to punt babies.
That's actually the voice that, like, fucking, you know, Pedro Pascal's character hears in The Mandalorian. It's just the voice whispering, "Kick the child! Kick the child!"
It's like, it's gonna be... I'm gonna come up with an episode of Star Wars Clone Wars where General Grievous invades the Kreshi. I think that's what it's called. The Jedi Temple, like, nursery. And Anakin is gonna be... like, Obi-Wan is gonna be like... "Oh no, he's chucking the younglings," and Anakin is like extremely torn.
Finally, some competition.
Yes, and Anakin is like extremely torn. Like, should he prevent General Grievous from kicking the babies? And it's gonna be like a really like subtle foreshadowing to when Anakin falls off the deep end and becomes Darth Vader. It's actually extremely compelling storytelling. But yeah,
Yeet the child.
Yeah, speaking about eating babies and kicking children, this is once again you're listening to TENGRIDOME episode 819. I was thinking about ways how I could combine 18 and 19 into one word to make it sound funny, but either way, today we assembled this crack team to talk about, not actually about kicking babies, but I mean in a sense it is about kicking babies, because we're going to talk about how we can convey and communicate analytical concepts to fighters and the broader MMA audience, like to, I guess, establish the problem. Well, first of all, today I'm joined, in case you hadn't noticed, by Haxx and Dan, who are pretty much regulars on the podcast at this point, and we're also joined by a special guest, and who is in fact having her podcasting debut. Congratulations, operator!
It's a pleasure to be here.
Congratulations, Operation Whiskey Sour. In fact, I think this is what should be the alternate title for this podcast. But either way, how are you guys doing?
Well, Operation Success on my end. I've been drinking, so all is well.
I mean, I guess that explains all the banter. We have an excuse now, kind of like Joan Jones or Paul Acosta.
I don't need an excuse.
I mean, no one needs an excuse to start drinking. Haxx, how's it going? Did the Australian government kill itself yet?
Well, so, you know, the wonderful contagion that is COVID has managed to get into Indigenous communities in New South Wales. And because Indigenous Australians have a proportionately lower rate of access to healthcare services and a proportionately higher rate of lasting, shall we say, contagions of a cardiovascular or respiratory nature, shit's pretty fucked, man.
Did Bruz did anything at all about it, or did he fuck off somewhere already, talking about how he's protecting the bush, mate?
That would involve him actually doing something. So I think the answer is a strong no.
I guess I'm looking forward to the next chapter in the Friendly Geordies saga that he has going. So there you go. Shout outs, Friendly Geordies, even though he never listens to this shit and will never listen, because he has much bigger things on his plate. Dan, Dictator Dan, how's the ethnic cleansing going?
What do you think? I want to cleanse everyone who keeps bothering me about Adderall every fucking day. We can't get your fucking Adderall in outside of the 30 days. It is a national health policy, and we can't send it out of town literally the day you're leaving. It's a pain in the fucking ass. Leave me alone.
Classic dictatorial position.
Yeah.
Also, moreover, I am reconsidering my stances on censorship as of the last 20 minutes because of all the slander that has been sent my direction.
I mean, you can't do nothing. I'm the dictator of this whole operation. I'm the dictator.
Oh, so the dictator name was ironic. I see where we're going with this.
No, I wasn't going anywhere with it. It wasn't ironic.
Well, yeah, of course we're not going anywhere. We've wasted 20 fucking minutes getting to the point.
I mean, did
I
we
think
waste
we've
them?
enhanced 20 fucking minutes.
Oh, Jesus.
Did we waste them, really? I mean... Alright, so the topic of today's discussion, as I was saying, is conveying analytical concepts to the broader MMA audience and like establishing communications between fight analysts and everyone else. And the problem that I've stumbled upon, that I've noticed, is that the fight site and other analysts frequently run into the problem where the analytical concepts where we wish to convey go through like this game of broken telephone. Immediate listeners tend to skim over certain points and tend to condense the ideas presented to them to such an extent where it becomes, for lack of a better word, dumbed down. Where, like, say, someone like wants, like, on Heavy Hands, Phil McKenzie and Conor Rebush may talk about how a particular MMA fighter may have problems in certain areas of the game. An immediate listener will go on Twitter and then say, oh my god, what a great episode. You've nailed such and such points where the fighter in question actually sucks. And he may not suck in those areas in particular. He may just be lacking a certain tool or certain nuance that would bring his overall game to a new level. And so there you have there already you have a breakdown in communications. And then another guy hops in for the convo and starts arguing with the listener, and then starts arguing with Connery Bush and Phil McKenzie about whether or not they were right in the first place, and without ever having listened to the actual podcast. And so on, it goes and goes and goes, and it turns into the complete mess that we call the MMA community right now. This is the state in which the MMA community currently resides. And I've assembled this crack team not to kick babies, in fact, and explode nurseries, but to talk about this problem and maybe, perhaps, in the course of this discussion, come up with certain ways to, I guess, alleviate the problem. And to start with, I would say, let's start with Operator, because it's her debut, and it's because I think she has lots of stuff to say about this issue. And I think to start with, we should, first of all, to outline the primary reasons for this issue. Operator, take it away.
Yeah, so... I mean, this is obviously a big question, and with all big questions, I think we have to kind of break it down into a bunch of sub-questions that we need to figure out how we want to answer. So, I mean, as you said, one of the problems with kind of conveying communication is that it gets filtered through layers of, like, it's like a game of telephone, right? You know, it gets passed through, like, through Twitter or through whatever, you know, through the Discord and through several layers, and then there's this telephone-like quality where the information gets degraded. But before we even get to that problem, there's a bunch of potential pitfalls kind of at the zeroth order level, which is, you know, how can analysts communicate most effectively to the fans that are, say, listening to the primary source, like listening to the podcast or reading the article directly. Or another zeroth order stage is, yeah.
Dan,
go.
For fuck's sake, stop typing. Or at least mute yourself. Oh, it wasn't Dan. It was Haxx.
I was not typing.
Oh, I wasn't typing. Like, I straight up wasn't typing. I'm just playing around with the mute button.
Okay. Yeah, sure, all right. Anyway, as you were.
Oh, yeah. And the other kind of zeroth order stage would be how can coaches communicate with...
Haxx, for fuck's sake! This man is ostensibly a middle-aged person. He is an adult. I think. And I think this is one more.
This is just what happens when you assemble this austere brain trust of
Yeah.
highly functioning individuals.
Actually, hang on. While we're at it, I think I forgot to actually allow you to introduce yourself properly and talk about what you do for a living and how your skill set is actually pertinent to this issue.
Yeah, who the fuck am I? So I'm an MMA fan, but I think the reason that I was assembled onto this crack team of experts is because my day job is a university professor in a scientific field. And most of my career life so far has been in the area of research, so I'll probably have a lot more to say about this topic kind of later on as I get more into the weeds of teaching and arguing with my colleagues about best practices for actually teaching science. But that's my background. It's very much thinking about how to mentor students and teach large classrooms, so kind of at the individual and group level alike, how to convey high-level abstract concepts in a digestible and clear way.
So basically you've added another reason why any passing MMA fan should just turn this off right away, because... I mean...
But on the other hand, I'm a woman, so that could be very exciting to the average MMA fan.
Well, one of two things.
That's the hook.
Either it's going to be extremely exciting and the potential for further simpage, or the complete opposite. Precisely because you're a woman.
This could go one of two ways, and it's even odds.
That's why they call me Tumen. I can do both at the same time.
Get you a man that can be two men.
But yeah, back to conveying concepts and stuff. The actual topic of this discussion.
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, so I was just saying this is a big problem with like a lot of potential failure modes and a lot of points at which we can attack the question. But I guess most helpful would be to start kind of at the basic kind of first chain in the supply chain of like information, which is, how can coaches talk to their fighters, and how can analysts actually convey to the audience that are digesting the primary sources, listening to the podcasts or reading the articles. Yeah, and I feel like I've already been rambling, but I'm happy to swing back to this.
I think Haxx is playing
kind of
an RTS right there in the background. Either that or he's just doing this on purpose.
What?
I can hear you fucking clicking.
Every podcast requires a challenge, and mine is keeping a train of thought on a ridiculously long-winded rant while Haxx frantically clicks in the background.
How is that even fucking audible? What the hell?
And this is why Dictator Dan won't let us have more Adderall.
This is all staying in, by the way. I'm not gonna edit this mess. Fuck this. I already spent...
I'm genuinely confused that that's audible. What the hell? Is it less audible now?
It's tremendously audible. It's Audacity. It's actually not audible at the moment.
Because he fucking muted himself. Of course it's not going to be audible.
Classic.
For fuck's sake. Alright.
Anyway, yeah, that was my intro spiel, but I feel like we should kick it around and then I can rant more.
So yeah, okay, Dan, you wrote like 3 pages of fucking notes prior to this, and so I'm assuming you have a lot to say about how to start breaking down this issue, how we can start.
Sure. So I think you all have to start at kind of the perspective of a bit of a why is it people do enjoy or why to watch combat sports, and I think it's because it offers a different medium than traditional sports. For one thing, it's more built around like principles of kind of engagement and kind of spectacle, as opposed to other ball sports out there. But those other sports in general tend to be a lot more accessible to just the average viewers or just participants because, well, for one thing, they're not nearly as quote-unquote violent in the typical ways that something like MMA is, and they don't have, like, direct, like, visceral or, like, visual consequences. But that also leads to MMA itself being a more unique and controversial kind of subject matter. So what happens is, as a result, you get a fan base that is going to be very prone to what I call narrativisms. And narrativisms are basically the idea of, okay, we establish this kind of idea, and it is the principal dominant kind of viewpoint behind this. And narratives are very easy to do because they exist in everything. They exist in politics, they exist in academia, they exist in basic social interactions. Narratives are easy, they're fun, they're pretty useful in general, but they can also be really problematic. And part of the issue is, in regards to MMA specifically, it is a sport that is riddled with narratives, and it's because it is a combat sport that is driven by the idea of, like, rankings and who is the best. And so most discussions you're going to see end up being like, oh, who beats who, who's the best? And it becomes less about how it works and how fighters work to incorporate their games to be the best, as opposed to just who's the best and, like, oh, why? And you'll have kind of that dominant promotion, the UFC, who can basically push whatever agenda at once, because it kind of holds a borderline monopoly over just most of the sport in general and media, because in MMA's media kind of niche, there isn't really a lot of investigative journalism and whatnot, so that leads to even less informed fans or people willing to stand up for quote-unquote, like, against those narratives. But there's a lot to it, but the gist of it is the main issue is that people just aren't informed, and they're not exactly looking to be informed, partially due to that lack of accessibility, but also due to just partially laziness, but also just lack of initiative or know-how to take that initiative.
It kind of reminds me a bit, in that sense, of American football, which also, I think, has kind of two broad classes of fans. Like, there are the people that just want to, like, tailgate at a football game or watch the Super Bowl casually or whatever and want the spectacle and don't really care. And then there's the subset of fans that is like, well, actually, American football is a really great and intricate game, and you have to understand, like, how the coaches map out the plays and blah, blah, blah. And it's a real question of which half of that fan base are you trying to cater to? Are you trying to find an effective way to capture the interest of the tailgating fans, or are you trying to figure out the best way to express content to and communicate with the fans that want to dissect the game?
Yeah, and the MMA community has grown quite a bit over the last few years, with several big-name fighters arguably being able to go mainstream and become stars. And, like, it's normal for fans of any type of entertainment media or sport to maintain a certain distance from something they like. It's a form of entertainment they enjoy during their free time, and that's it. However, we've seen many examples of bona fide cultish behavior from casual fans in recent years, and the rise of online mass communications that started in the 90s and the continued integration of the internet in our daily life led to a certain proliferation of parasocial relationships, I think. Like, people tie their identity to music artists, movie actors, and sports figures, brands, TV shows, video games, you name it. And fighters aren't an exception in this case, and it's not a new phenomenon. Obsessive fans can be found in any time period in one way or another, but nevertheless it's become increasingly apparent that the internet makes that phenomenon more visible and seemingly more potent. Like, normally what separates a hardcore fan from a casual fan is the amount of knowledge they have and were able to accumulate over the years and deeper understanding of the type of media they enjoy. But the drastically improved access to information makes the conversion process from a casual fan to a hardcore quote-unquote fan in the traditional sense much quicker. What's interesting, though, is it's been hypothesized or assumed by many that increased access to information would mean that people will become more educated on a variety of different topics, and their willingness to deepen their knowledge will increase. And what actually happens is that the overabundance of information means many people are threatened with information burnout. Like, past a certain point, the info noise becomes too much, And as such, it created an atmosphere in which instant gratification is what drives the majority of people instead. People seek to experience as many strong emotions typically associated with media interaction as possible in as short an amount of time as possible. And as such, we've seen a noticeable increase of MMA fans who do not seek to improve their knowledge of the sport and do not seek to evaluate the sport critically or analytically. And what we have instead is thousands of incredibly vocal fans who possess minimal knowledge of the sport but are nonetheless extremely passionate. What's more important, however, is that they are extremely fickle and easy to sway with marketing strategies or promotional campaigns, and or narratives in be it commentary or stuff like the UFC's embedded series and the video logs and posts that fighters themselves or their teams make on social media. But
One thing I want to point out as well is that despite the fact that I think our site is looking to try to change, kind of like in an uphill battle, trying to like bring that more analytical awareness side, it doesn't mean we're ever going to say to someone that you have to enjoy the sport differently. It's more so, hey, here's another reason to like this sport or appreciate the participants, how to have empathy for them. If people want to watch it just because they like seeing people punch each other really hard, then by all means. But that's kind of the goal that our kind of community is looking to build. We want to establish like these principles of just, this is how this works, and this is why you can respect it more than you might already do. This is how you see the humans and like the kind of like scientific sides to it as well.
yeah, like there is a certain degree of anti-intellectualism in MMA, I think, in the current MMA community. Like, there's this idea of analysts as quote-unquote gatekeepers or ruiners. Like, there's a very real segment of the MMA fan base where analysts tend to be painted as joyless pricks who are only in this to show off how big their brain is without regard for the reasons why other people may have gotten into this sport. Sentiments like, no one thinks about this shit mid-fight, you guys are just grifters, even though fighters, even though the things that they do achieve the things that analysts outline. It's just that they don't quite frame the things they do in the same way that analysts do. It's just something that their coaches thought up prior to the fight during the course of their training. Or that analysts should just lay off certain fighters or certain fights and just enjoy the show, even though the quality of fighters' skill sets directly affects one's enjoyment of the fight. So, if the fight is dog shit, and if the fighters, quite frankly, suck at what they do, it's not going to make for good entertainment, you know. But it's something we can get. It's something we can talk about all day, and so I think I guess we should go about actually trying to break down the primary reasons for the issues that we're facing, which I think we kind of like veered a bit to the side, which is, I guess, the theme of today's recording. But so I think Haxx had something to offer on how to break down this issue in the conversation prior to the recording. Haxx?
Well, I mean, maybe to point to some framing before we go into that discussion, because I think it's important. The first thing that often gets mentioned is that MMA is a baby sport. It's young. It's new. There's a lot of, I suppose for lack of a better version, what we might call conventional wisdom in other sports, or like, let's put it in quotation marks, basic knowledge of the sport that everybody understands because it's just been repeated so many times by players, by coaches, by teams, by fans, by even players that it's kind of become a cultural trope. So, like an example in, baseball, Tumen and I have had some side discussions about this. There are certain statistics, so there are certain indicators of a player's quality where even somebody who may not follow baseball in an intellectual concept would probably still be able to roughly explain what it means, something like on-base percentage. MMA doesn't really have the depth or complexity or even the generations in terms of how long it's been around for people to have those kind of cultural tropes or ideas. Like, when somebody in baseball says he gets on base or he has a batting average, there's a bunch of different assessments and inbuilt variations and understandings of that player that are kind of built into that phrase, where even the most casual baseball enjoyer kind of is getting across some information that has intellectual value. I don't think we really have that kind of level of MMA yet. The closest thing we have is probably strike count, and as many people have pointed out, that's essentially two 40-year-old dudes mashing buttons when one guy hits another man from the side of the ring. So I would say that's one reason why this conversation is very difficult to pull off. The second thing I would point out is that, and I think this is something that Kareem Zidane has made very clear, the UFC has certainly attached itself to movements of a certain intellectual nature that are actively anti-intellectual. There are political figures, there are groups, there are camps that really don't want us to think about MMA in a way that may involve some degree of intellectual analysis or process, or even, for lack of a better word, here's my philosophy and how I break down and I analyze mixed martial arts. So the UFC itself, I think, has become a powerful force in incentivizing and encouraging its fan base to reword an old Apple phrase, instead of think different, think dumber. And I think that that is a component that a lot of people seem very curious to overlook. The third element I'd add is that there doesn't seem to, even to today, to be a very high level of understanding of mixed martial arts' rules and how they influence everything from judge decisions to the way fighters fight. One thing that has always frustrated me in both boxing and mixed martial arts discourse when I read it on the Twitter is that people do not seem to appreciate the tremendous impact that the rules of a sport have on everything from the value that coaches and teams and preparation attach to specific elements in that sport to the decisions that fighters make in the middle of a fight. How are we supposed to explain analytical concepts with precision if we don't, even as a sport, have a concrete understanding of what half the fucking rules mean, or that a different understanding or interpretation of what those rules mean is going to change the way fighters fight? A lot of fighters, a lot of camps, a lot of judges, a lot of commentators still seem to think just getting a takedown should help you win the round, even though the rules explicitly say it shouldn't. How do you communicate analysis based on the rules that knows that's not true to a population or a group that still thinks it's true? These are difficult questions before you even get to what is the process of explaining analysis.
Yeah, and media conglomerates aren't stupid. They see what is happening and adapt to it to continue their growth in the industry. Like WME IMG or Endeavor is a talent agency, and it's a pretty damn big one of the largest in the US. And Endeavor owns the UFC, and they saw the kind of profit figures like Ronda Rousey and Conor McGregor were able to bring. And the UFC frequently manipulates and actively seeks out narratives that might prove profitable. It doesn't really matter whether using real-life situations for those narratives is morally or ethically acceptable. I think, as Tommy had said on an episode way back, the UFC is not amoral, but it is very distinctly immoral. Or rather, it's not immoral, but amoral, whatever, whichever one is more correct. But
it's not immoral, but amoral.
Yeah, that was it. So for example, Conor McGregor throwing a dolly at a bus and injuring fellow fighters was used in the build-up for McGregor versus Nurmagomedov, as well as his distinctly Islamophobic and race-baiting rhetoric was used in the build-up to this fight. Colby Covington gets put front and center whenever he's there to hype up the potential Usman rematch. And Walt Harris's tragic loss of his daughter was put in the promotional package to hype up his fight against Alistair Overeem. This is what we are operating with here. And also, like this misunderstanding of the rules, as Haxx pointed out, this misunderstanding of the rules actually affects the sport on all levels, and you can see how certain camps may train their fighters to fight in a way that is doesn't contribute to actually winning the fights according to the actual rules. some fighters still fight as if securing meaningless takedowns or trying to grind it out on the cage is going to net them the win in the end down the stretch, even though according to the rules it won't. But since the judges actually do not seem to understand the criteria very well, it still happens. Fighters like this are still essentially encouraged to continue fighting like this in this subpar, less than effective fashion. But
yeah, and to amplify like a different part of what Haxx said, I mean, basically, it's difficult to communicate with a casual fan precisely because there isn't a simple set of best practices in the sport yet that we can point to as kind of signposts to get relatively casual fans oriented to what's going on. And another thing that I think MMA suffers from, in contrast to a lot of other popular sports, is basically that people don't, in gym class, we all are forced at some point to play basketball or soccer or whatever else. And this kind of hands-on active participation in something is really important generally to conceptualizing and learning something. I mean, in science, the students have to solve problems. They have to create their own mental model or mental edifice of the basic structure that they're trying to learn to start to get an actual intuitive sense for what's going on, what are the parameters, what are the possibilities. We get a lot of that in childhood with a whole suite of other sports, but plenty of MMA fans don't necessarily have any kind of basic traditional martial arts experience, let alone any kind of MMA training. And that's a real impediment, I think, to getting people to grasp or to kind of hold on to a lot of concepts that one wants to convey to them.
Yeah, so
there's something I have to add to that. Part of if you work in the educational field, like I think maybe a few of us subtly might have hinted at that we'd have. The thing is that you discover a lot of people learn differently and apply like basic sets of what they learn to like different subsets of knowledge or activities differently. So in school, typically, if you're teaching different kinds of students, you learn that they will learn something a little differently. For instance, like some kids will learn better just visually through visual examples. Some will learn better through just audio, like being told things. Some will learn better by doing. And those kinds of things are important when you're working in an educational or kind of informative environment to be able to account for, to reach as many people as possible, to ensure that they understand something the most. And kind of the problem, though, for instance, with, as Haxx has touched upon, like, commentators not knowing the rules, you are having people who are commentating by the age, they're supposed to be the experts, and when they don't know the rules, or when they're focusing on the things that don't really matter, or intentionally misdirecting the viewers and contradicting those several things, that hurts like a viewer's ability to really appreciate or understand what's going on. But there's also the cases of, say, what's visually going on. Again, people don't typically, I think, watch MMA or most combat sports to really learn what's happening. So they're not necessarily inclined to look for that. They're not, like, engaging that side of their brain where it's like, hey, I want to understand what's happening. They're kind of just engaging it more reactionary as opposed to being kind of proactive about it. And they don't have to necessarily do that, but there is a benefit to it.
Yeah, so in essence, what I think we can all conclude is that up to a certain point, this issue is pretty much unavoidable. And this pretty much brings us to the reason for why we're having this conversation. Like, if the issue is unavoidable, what can we do to curtail it? Or at least limit the extent through which... limit the extent of this spread of misinformation by putting out actual measured, nuanced, analytical content that will have some sort of degree of weight. Where do you start?
I think I'd go back to something Operator talked about. So, say there's different layers or channels of information between you, the person making the point, and the person receiving your point. So let's say the first channel is obviously your brain to whatever format you choose to pass on information. So
Okay, so let's use you as an example, Tumen. You record a podcast. You have some thoughts in your brain. Those thoughts are probably going to be filtered by the fact that you now have to communicate using words, especially if you may not be using, a language that you're as comfortable with. And that doesn't just mean, you might be speaking in a literal different language. It might mean you're using terminology that's different, whatever. I suspect you'd probably feel a tiny bit less confident doing a purely Muay Thai or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu breakdown than you would be about punching dudes in the face. So that's the first way. And as you continue to go down the levels, then you've got, what about the possibility of information being lost or misunderstood because the other person doesn't have the technical ability to understand what you're saying? What happens if the person that heard that then relays some of the information that you've relayed to them to a third person? You can kind of get this game of telephone or Chinese whispers where things are breaking down at every stage. And by the time the information that you have relayed to somebody has got so much signal noise in it, it doesn't really reflect what you said at the start. I think the first way to help reduce this kind of, natural decay, if you like, or this natural entropy of communication is to have a clear set of principles right back where you started, so that if somebody tries to follow this chain down, so let's say a Discord patron is poorly repeating an argument that you originally made that is repeated by another Discord patron, and they start following it all the way back up to the chain to the original podcast. If you have a clear set of ideas or principles or analytics or a rationale behind why you did the podcast in the first place, like a value statement also for a company, I know a lot of younger people like to view those with some scorn and derision. The type of people that are Redditors that have never actually worked in a company. Those types of clear statements of values are actually a really powerful way of establishing a baseline series of motivators. Or to maybe put it another way, so let's use the fight side example. So Ed has kind of been pushing a project where he's gone through the rules with various other fight side people and has said, these are the rules of mixed martial arts. Here is what they mean. Here is what we believe they mean, and this understanding of what the rules of mixed martial arts mean is the guideline by which we analyze fights. So if we look at an Aldo fight, and we see things that Aldo is doing in the fight, how effective they are, we are going to try and measure and track by how well they reflect Aldo fulfilling the rules of meaningful accomplishments in mixed martial arts fights. So if you kind of think about that, there's a kind of intellectual bracing or a foundation for, hopefully, everything that the fight side does, which is keyed back to the fundamental rules of mixed martial arts and how we interpret them. So no matter what you think of the fight side article on mixed martial arts, when you chase that back up the chain all the way, in theory, what we're saying, what we're doing, the points we're making, the breakdowns we're providing are informed by what is effective, what is successful, what matters according to the rules. So even if you may not understand an article or a point or a breakdown, at least you know on some level, or at least you can have some confidence on some level, hey, these guys are saying that this takedown or these constant takedowns from this fighter are not effective because they believe they do not score or put the fighter in a position to score, and not scoring is bad because it doesn't get you any points in the rules, which means that you're not more likely to win the fight. So at least there's a kind of way of, if you have noise or data loss from you portraying your opinion to people, by having a set of concrete principles behind your analysis, people can kind of rebuild what you're saying in the opposite direction by going back to the ideas, the principles, and the methodology behind what you're actually saying.
Yeah, and to sort of even go beyond the rules, it's been frequently pointed out that the rules are not perfect. No rule set is pretty much perfect. I don't think there's a sport on Earth where there's a rule set that doesn't allow for some sort of gaps or loopholes. But in such cases, there is an opportunity for us to sort of fall back on the fundamentals of fighting as something we can use. We can study. I mean, this is mixed martial arts, and by definition, it takes techniques from other more well-established sports, which you can then study to learn how the elements of those sports work within the context of the rule set of mixed martial arts. And that's how you can start gauging the effectiveness, the effectiveness of the individual techniques that the fighters are using. Because many people talk about how the criteria of damage is too subjective, or that judging fighters and judging how fighters are able to fight effectively is too subjective. It depends from person to person. But I mean, I think Dan had something to offer on this particular counter argument.
Yeah, so the whole thing, I've had people before kind of ask me, like, so how exactly do you find analysis stuff? How do you learn to be analytical and whatnot, specifically with MMA? And I said on a previous podcast, there's a couple of things you need with caveats. Like, you need to be able to draw from references. I think Haxx has already done a good job really, like, kind of outlining this, but it's kind of like, it means you have to watch a lot of fights, but you also have to have references with people and rules that you talk to and collaborate with. You have to really have the time to do it also. You have to, like, put the effort into it. But I think an unsaid kind of aspect is you also kind of have to like it a bit, or see at least some kind of intrinsic value in it. Because if it isn't just for you as, like, a fan to appreciate it more, it's also just, like, understanding kind of like, hey, this guy's doing some cool stuff. I want to understand how that cool stuff works. So as for discussions in general, I think there's a whole conversation I had a few years ago with a professor of mine about objectivity versus subjectivity in analysis. And I always remember what he said because I think it kind of outlines how I think quite a bit. I don't think, first and foremost, you can have everything be perfectly objective. I don't think that's possible, ever. Especially in regards to MMA analysis, where the sport is constantly so fluid and dynamic, and you have so many different possibilities, but also so many variations of, like, single, like, subsets. You also have, just in general, like, this is kind of, I think, kind of an unsaid thing about analysts and why there's such an anti-intellectual or just, like, confusing, like, what qualifies as an analyst rhetoric out there. But, like, the thing about analytical communities in general is that I don't think any one of us has ever claimed to be 100% right. And, in fact, I would argue we're all willing to be wrong. We're just going into it with having made tons of empirical observations based upon pattern recognition and trying to explain those patterns to other people, where it's like, okay, we've seen all the data, we've seen all the patterns, we've made all these observations, here's what we think it means, and we interpret it and make it accessible for other people to understand. And now that implicitly means we're waiting on a response from someone else maybe to go, hey, I maybe found something else that maybe counteracts what you said, or maybe, like, adds to what you said. And that is a good thing, because that way we all kind of can start talking and create this community where it's like, hey, we're learning more about this guy, this fighter who participates, and that way we establish some threshold of what's going on more and kind of build towards that kind of understanding. And I think that's kind of the sense of objectivity we're going for. Now, subjectivity, like, that's going to happen because we all have biases. You can't get rid of bias ever. I don't think that's possible, especially in, like, a conversation like this. But there are some things you can do. One, you talk with other people, you collaborate with them. And especially, I think, people who maybe don't exactly have the same favorites as you. You can also apply, like, different kind of stances, like constantly asking yourself questions. What if I'm wrong about this? What am I seeing? Why is it important? Etc., etc. Like, personally, for me, what I try to do every single piece of footage I look at, or something I play in general, is I ask myself two questions constantly. I call it my what, so what method. I say, what am I watching? And, like, what am I seeing? It's really basic. It's general. Anyone can do this. Just describe what's happening. And then I go into the so what section, which is, why is this important? And try to explain it, like, interpret it based upon observations, hypotheticals, etc. And as long as I'm acknowledging all these, like, little intricacies and hold my reader's hand, I create some kind of avenue for discussion or explanation. And I think that's how you kind of solve the potential objectivity anti-intellectual kind of conversation to some degree, but it's probably not going to go away perfectly.
Yeah.
Something I'd add to that too is just for someone that is trying to start doing these kinds of doing analysis with MMA or really with anything, and this is something I also try to impress upon my grad students, is when you're learning something and when you're trying to make novel observations, like be it in research or just trying to, develop whatever theory or whatever best practice you're trying to do in your own life. A very underrated thing is, I think, the power of analogy. And this, in science and mathematics, this ends up being really deep. If you pursue analogies with some other better, well understood thing in, whatever kind of novel area you're trying to research in, like, this often tends to lead you in extremely fruitful directions. Sometimes in mathematics, it leads you to precise equivalences in things, like what seems like an analogy, sort of just a general umbrella in which you can organize your thoughts, ends up being more than that. It ends up kind of literally describing the thing that you set out to describe in the first place. And in the context of MMA, it's a little bit more difficult maybe to start using analogies with other things, precisely because MMA is at such an ill-defined stage. The judges don't agree on the rules. The commentators are fucking clowns, and confuse the audience. But nonetheless, at least we have, as kind of theoretical anchors, we do have these other sports. We have boxing, we have jiu-jitsu, we have sports with best practices and well-defined rule sets, wherein we can start to build analogies to phenomena that you observe in MMA. And I think just trying to be alert to those comparisons already gives you kind of a great way to start thinking about MMA, even though it's a much broader discipline.
Yeah. I find it quite ridiculous that so many people seem to brush aside things like impact as something subjective, and by subjective they usually mean anything goes. And there are degrees of subjective, and something being subjective doesn't mean there isn't a degree of objectivity you can look out for or narrow down the subjective things you're looking for until you reach something sensible. But either way, there is always going to be a certain degree of separation, and as I've stated before, the idea here is to narrow the gap, make the gap as narrow as possible for to allow for as little loss of information as there is as possible. And here's one thing I wanted to ask. I think you've particularly you, operator, I think you've faced it quite often in your everyday life and in your field of work. There's always a certain interplay between field communicators and field experts. And the question I wanted to ask you: can communicators, and I think the question will be the answer will be obvious to you, but for the sake of our listeners, can communicators and their pursuit for clarity fall into the same pitfalls fight analysts do when they wish to present their ideas in a condensed and simple manner?
Yeah. Short answer, yes. And I have a lot of gripes with kind of communicators in my own field and the pitfalls that they fall into. So I can start by outlining those and then kind of point to the similar trends that you can see in MMA analysis and MMA commentary. And I think a lot of the kind of basic pitfalls can be categorized into the difference between actually scientists versus scientism, or one of these popular terms that appears nowadays. Which is, and there's another real problem also, which is that a lot of times, and this is maybe a criticism that's levied against MMA analysts too, but a lot of times the people that are publicizing the field, like the primary famous science communicators in the field, are not themselves actually doing cutting edge science either anymore or ever. There are a couple exceptions, but by and large, some of the best known and most beloved science communicators are just simply not at the forefront of things. And that means that their opinions are going to necessarily lack some important subtleties and nuances And you might think, okay, when you're communicating broad brush things like that to a general audience, you don't necessarily need to be at the forefront of research. You just need some solid understanding of the basics, and you need to be charismatic or whatever. That's basically not true, and this is exactly why you see a lot of science communicators giving what experts in the field know to be oversimplified, kind of cartoonish, and in particular misleading descriptions of whatever it is they're trying to talk about. And this is, I think, why people kind of levy the criticism at analysts that, oh, you guys aren't professional fighters or long-term coaches or whatever. How can you possibly, communicate something effective? How can you really know a thing well enough to communicate it if you are sort of not also the primary expert or like a long-time professional in your field? And I think the answer to, at least the answer to the getting expertise in science is obviously a tricky and intricate question, and I can't really solve that now. But with respect to analysis, honestly, just giving thoughtful takes and like detailed observations is far and away like a huge improvement on pretty much most of the things that are out there right now. And MMA is a nascent field. It's young. It's at a stage where people can just simply benefit from outsider takes and people that are paying attention and giving a thoughtful perspective on things. In science communication, there's a bit of a difference in that, like, physics and mathematics and whatever else are extremely old fields, and you do need to build up a huge bevy of expertise in order to really get certain things right. MMA has the benefit that a thoughtful outsider take can actually go really far.
Yeah, there's a problem where certain a big subset of MMA fans seem to think that being the simple act of being an MMA fighter automatically makes you a strategic genius or gives you credibility to comment on the sport and talk about the concepts of fighting and break down the fighting fundamentals. Like, why do you think MMA fighters need coaches, and why do camps explicitly pay for scouting services quite often? If it's a good camp, that is. Some camps do not even do scouting or think about strategy in any defined way. And
plugging my Jackson hoodwinked joke.
Yeah, pretty much. Essentially, what was the joke again?
It was something like if a fighter goes to a camp with a big reputation, but that's been coasting on its reputation for years and actually sucks, it's called getting Jackson hoodwinked.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
It was more eloquent on Twitter, but that was the joke.
That is the case. That is the case with a lot of camps around the world. Well, in particular in America, but because MMA is, I think, it's still shouldn't be controversial to say that MMA is predominantly an American sport still, simply because by the sheer fact that the UFC is a hegemon in the market and most of its fan base is located in America. But regardless. Coaches and fighters frequently focus on very specific areas of skill development, and it leaves them with little to no time to break down and analyze concepts like ringcraft, footwork, and etc. from a big picture strategic standpoint and from a tactical standpoint, and from a standpoint of someone who actively thinks about the interplay between these things in the MMA meta. And fighters frequently have no time to take a step back and reflect on what they've learned, simply because they have to fight. They have no time for all this crap. They have no time to sit down and stare at notes and watch hundreds of hours of footage. But and yeah, certainly, and we've talked about this a lot elsewhere on Twitter, on social media, or on blog posts, or in the Discord. But there is value to be found, and Zach Makovsky will attest to this. Zach Makovsky, the Bellator champion, the UFC veteran, that the outsider's perspective gives something that fighters and coaches simply cannot hit upon because they are so narrowly focused on actually winning fights. They simply have no time to sit down, take a step back, and look at all this with critical eyes. And certainly, high-level competition experience offers certain perspectives that you would not get through any other means as outside of actually competing at a high level. But there are certain things that may approximate it, but it's a world in itself. And fighting, analogies is essentially all that we do, essentially everything that we rely upon to convey analysis, but nonetheless, fighting is not something you can quite understand unless you've actually been in the fight. You can approximate the certain basics and kind of like sort of internalize certain basics, but in the strictest sense of the word, it's better to sort of like veer on the side of caution.
Well, I think one thing that people misunderstand is that there are certain types of, for lack of a better word, expertise in analysis, right? At its most basic level, one of the things that makes intellectual pursuits, so let's use an example, say if you wanted to be a high-level communicator or also, please excuse the pun, a high-level operator in theoretical physics, you're kind of using the same set of, for lack of a better word, brain skills in many ways to become an expert in both. But if you are a high-level analyst in mixed martial arts and you're also a high-level fighter, it's possible to be those two things and actually not have a tremendous overlap of skills. So let's use an example of Daniel Cormier, right? And no, this is not going to be a DC bash session. Calm the fuck down, people that actually care about him. So what I mean with this is, right, like when DC comes out to fight, he's using physical skills mostly. Like I think we would all agree that DC's game is built around, I have tremendous physical advantages, I leverage them on an opponent. Now, I think it's a fair analysis of DC to say that DC is not using the same muscles in both a literal or metaphorical sense when he goes out and fights as he does when he talks about analysis. And I think DC himself has freely admitted that. So what that means is that in order to be a high-level mixed martial artist or a high-level wrestler or a high-level anything, DC is going to have to spend most of his time mastering the physical aspects of bashing some fucking skulls in, right? Like that seems... So DC doesn't have the time to specialize in thinking about concepts like critically examining footage, studying opponents, because he's too busy running the fucking miles. He's too busy, eating the Popeye's chicken. He's too busy being a physical person with a physical presence, right? Whereas if you're somebody like Dr. Brian Cox, there's not a perfect overlap between his science communication and his thinking about the stars, so to speak. But there's a lot more of an overlap, right? So I think people really misunderstand the idea of specialization and fail to understand that the specialization of a high-level mixed martial artist into being a high-level mixed martial artist means they don't have a lot of time or energy or brain power to use for necessarily understanding all of the nuances of high-level mixed martial arts, right? Because when I see people say that, as in like, how dare you trash talk this guy? He is a high-level X. He understands it better than you do. My honest answer to a lot of those people is you genuinely don't understand the stresses of high-level competition, do you? You don't understand that to be top 5 in the world at something with lots of money and relevance on the line and everybody coming for your fucking neck, you don't have the time to think about stuff that isn't, directly relevant to you winning. Scouting opponents, thinking about the long-term trends of the meta, thinking about tightening up certain areas of your form that are not an issue for you now and will probably not be an issue for you for the next 2 years, but if you don't develop a less energy-intensive style, will probably start to get you knocked the fuck out as you age. That is not shit that is high on a list of a high-level competitor's, worries.
Yeah,
so I think a lot of people fail that.
Yeah, I wanted to cap off what I was trying to say basically along those lines as well, which is I think, communicators in a specialized field really, to be successful, need to have expertise. But exactly as Haxx was saying, when it comes to this MMA shit, there are different axes of expertise, and the ones that, like TFS really offers, might be along kind of a different direction than a high level competitor, but they're nonetheless expertise. It's just a complementary area, and the subject is kind of broad enough that is perfectly consistent.
Yeah, and that brings us really to the I think we talked enough about we've done our best to outline all the issues that we're facing here when with regards to communicating analysis, but how do you establish communications? What solutions we can use to establish communications between the seemingly disparate fields with like fight analysis versus scouting versus coaching? How do you establish communications between these three fields to actively affect the way fighters fight and quite possibly in the long run improve the baseline level of quality of the sport and clarify the problems and sort of do away with all the misconceptions that currently permeate the MMA community? Who is willing to start broaching the subject? Come on.
Me.
Of course, naturally. Yeah, fuck's sake.
Yeah, so I do want to wrap up two quick little things from previous topical matter that I do have to say. So I do think analysts in general, such as TFS, do get kind of this I've kind of hinted at this earlier, but I want to be crystal clear. I don't really think most analysts or people who are aspiring to be analysts should or probably don't think of themselves entirely as quote-unquote professional expert analysts, because I think it's way better and way healthier for us to see each other in kind of a more community kind of sense of fellow learners and collaborators. Because I'm speaking maybe from my former educational background, and maybe Operator can also attest to this also, but it's like, when you're teaching students, you want those students to basically be better than you at some point, so you can learn something from them. And that's kind of, I think, what a lot of analysts strive for, because it's like, we're not showing people all this just to prove that maybe we're better and more knowledgeable than you. Although it is cool to know a lot of this stuff, but it's like, we want to share this because we find it cool and we want you to be able to eventually be able to share stuff with us, and it creates this feedback network. That's how our site, for instance, has all these staff members who talk to each other a lot, for instance.
Yeah, and it elevates the field.
Exactly. That's kind of the point. And so it's not an on-purpose thing where it's we're trying to be exclusionary. I understand people maybe being yeah, you're kind of being a little aggressive, or maybe not handling it in civilized discussions as much as you should, which is definitely, I think, a totally fair, legitimate criticism, because but I also have a counter argument that I'll get to in a minute. I do think that analysts in general don't really think of themselves as analysts, though. I think looking at ourselves as kind of avid learners is a far healthier kind of endeavor. But I will say, in regards to answering the question of how can we really change all this or start to address these issues, I think our site has kind of been trying to figure that out, and I don't really think there's a clear established answer, because it's probably going to be a permanently uphill battle, because we're dealing with the dominant narratives of a far more mainstream ideals or ideas more than anything else. But it's I think getting the content out there and accessible, readable, watchable for people to see is the main thing. So it's why we make commentary. So it's alternative commentaries where we explain what's going on as things are going on. But I think also making ourselves accessible and making the works that people can follow, giving very specific, here's what's happening, why it's happening, why is it important, is really, really important, because people can start to connect the dots themselves, because it's knowledge is pretty transferable across different areas. For instance, I made this partial joke on Twitter the other day, but it's kind of true. You want to know how I personally figured out ringcraft? It's because I play very difficult video games where positioning in those games was really, really important. Another thing is, I've also taught in a classroom, and paying attention to where students' desks are and navigating that classroom, that's easily transferable to paying attention to how guys move in the cage or ring and stuff. So I apply those different skills or like observational kind of skills to a different kind of area. And encouraging people to kind of think like that's important too, because I do think some people who are trying to be analysts make the mistake of, like, they know what things are, but they don't really understand what things are, if that makes sense. Because it's like, I'll see someone who's maybe just like saying like, this guy's entries are pretty good, but maybe he could work on his footwork. And I always just sit there kind of thinking, okay, you're saying that, and maybe there's a part of me that agrees with you, but why did you come to that conclusion? Can you explain that to someone else? Can you properly articulate it? So it's like, for instance, in all my articles, I constantly talk about boxers who use their jabs a lot. And so I can say this guy has a good jab. Here's how I can describe it's a good jab, because it accomplishes a couple of things. It measures distance. I go over the purposes of the jab, like here's all of its utilities, and here's examples where I see this guy doing it consistently. So I have proofs for basically how I accomplished something or figured something out. Now, ideally, that's something that requires a lot of research, and yeah, that's true. But I have the proof out there. I have the concepts out there, and I've explained it in a specific, elaborative way for other people to get it. And I think, like, the other thing is, I really think encouraging people to ask questions or having conversations is important, making ourselves accessible. I get people who DM me a lot, and I encourage people to DM me because I like to answer questions. And if I don't know, well, I'll pass it off to one of my peers, and maybe they can answer it. Because it's like, wrestling isn't my niche. It's not my strength. So if someone asks me, hey, how would you describe a good takedown entry? I'd go like, well, here's what I think, but I wouldn't consider myself an expert or probably the best person. So I'm going to pass this answer off to Ed. And Ed, here's Ed's screenshotted answer just for reference. And hope that helps. And maybe they come back for more. Maybe they start engaging me in more discussions. And maybe, hey, one day they start explaining things to me too. And it's like, well, that's cool. But I think encouraging questions is really, really important. But answering questions is also really, really key. And Twitter and Reddit aren't the best platforms for that. But I think giving it some effort, as long as the other person is willing to give effort, is kind of important. Those are kind of my 2 cents, but it's kind of an uphill battle.
Yeah, and this is maybe partly like the scientist in me, but when people make statements of the sort you said, Dan, like, oh, this fighter is good at entries but needs work on his footwork, you know, that's a general enough statement where I think we're not kind of defining our terms. Okay, what do you mean by footwork? I mean, does he get backed up against the cage a lot? If so, against what sort of fighters? You know, is he good or bad at, you know, corralling his opponent against the cage to execute some part of his game? You know, just kind of making precise not just the general scope of things that are going on, but in what context, in what phase of the game, in relation to what game plans and overarching strategies, you know, because these kind of vague statements aren't actually necessarily telling the story or just making it a clear jumping off point for analyzing anything properly.
Yeah, speaking of definitions, we use this term fight analyst over and over again, and yet I don't think anyone has actually came up with any specific definition for what a fight analyst is or what a fight analyst does. How would
you pronounce it analyst?
How would you define analysis and well, either of you? This is a question to everyone. How would you define a fight?
I'm helping you with your pronunciation that you complain so much about.
Shut the fuck up. How would either of you define what a fight analyst does, and how would you define the term itself? What is the definition of a fight analyst and their field of work? Any ideas?
Well, I've thought a lot about analysts in the past, so I'm glad you asked the question. No, it's really unfair to drop these big questions on us, Iggy. That I haven't thought of how to properly define things before, but I guess that's what I'm advocating for.
That's why I have my own show.
I feel like I've fallen into my own trap.
I always blindside people. That's why. That's why
He's also
That's
doing
why you'll
this
never be
because
invited on Heavy Hands again.
Yes, that's why I'm.
I have an answer, but I'm not allowed to talk. Also, Haxx is also here.
He also
Dan.
is doing this because we've had a
Yeah, it's all right,
podcast.
Dan.
We've already
You have my
answered
permission.
Oh,
this.
it's okay. It's okay. Yeah. So I think basically how I've always thought of analysis is it's kind of maybe not science is the right word, but I think it's kind of the process of examination and explanation. And I think generally just what an analyst does is they just want to explain things. They want to outline things and make it accessible for maybe a wider audience as and then create kind of that like ongoing discourse. I think an analyst's job is to just take maybe some information that isn't necessarily as widespread prevalent knowledge and try to like outline some kind of discourse or more simplifications of it to other people.
Yeah, I feel like right now MMA analysis is kind of at the analogous stage to Darwin just kind of rolling up to the Galapagos and making a bunch of detailed observation about like cool species of birds that he found, and then trying to fit it into some kind of overarching framework that explains things. That's like phenomenologically where I think we are, but that's not a satisfactory definition. But you sprung the question on me, so I'm not gonna be too upset at myself, Iggy.
Haxx?
It's almost like we did a podcast on this.
Haxx has died. He just went away to play Vermintide or something.
No, I just said like on my internal audio track, it's almost like we've done a podcast on this a few times just to be a dick, because now I can pretend that I've had pre-saying for this. But no, it is almost like we've done a podcast on this before. And I don't think I would move too much from the positions in there. I think analysis comes down to kind of three concepts: trying to understand, trying to record your understanding in a systematic way so that you continually improve it. It's part of an iterative process. And then being able to communicate that to a specific group of other people so that you can get that information across to them. That doesn't necessarily have to be casual people or experts. It can be whoever you want to get it across to. I would also probably say, that on the whole, the process of analysis is very much what you want it to be as well. There are a few people on the fight side who I think if you ask them would freely admit that they are more interested in taking analysis and, how would I put it, kind of making analysis and making that analysis more digestible by the average person. However, there are equally so people on the fight side who I think are more interested in doing higher order analysis that would probably make more sense to somebody that's already in the game, so to speak. Neither of those approaches is wrong. Another person that I think would be extremely good to give a kind of shout out to is Schwan. If you look at his analysis, he kind of has a very unique take on analysis that is very different to a lot of mixed martial arts people, because Schwan kind of does two things. I'm probably mispronouncing his name, apologies, but he kind of breaks his analysis down in it's kind of, he breaks it down into two things. His first type of analysis is what I would call very rough analysis, in the sense he's trying to do analysis for camps so they can understand how to make their fighters better. So it's maybe, it's much more about feeling, and it's much more about not what the theoretical best version of the fighter would be or building systems. It's more about how to get you from point A to B. So that's an extremely unique type of analysis that I don't think we have enough of in the mixed martial arts world. And Schwan also has what I would call, for lack of a better word, life analysis. If you look at a lot of the way he analyzes fighters, he spends a lot of time talking about, particularly in other sports that may not be entirely MMA, or talking about young people getting into the sport for the first time. He talks a lot about the routines of establishing yourself as a person, establishing yourself as a personality, establishing your support system, almost as much as of a life coach as just, punch straight, hit hard, and kick the body as part of your attritional technique because you're a fucking monster over 5 rounds. So there's lots of different approaches to analysis. And maybe I'd just add one last quote, because I like introducing Alpha Centauri quotes because it makes Dan have a hernia because he can't understand the game. So, look, we don't just take, sand from the beach, right, and make a fucking computer. We use very crude tools to fashion better tools. And then we use those better tools to fashion even better tools. And we kind of keep doing that over and over again. And that's the same with statistics. That is the same with analytical approaches. Each minor refinement is a step in the process, right? And we need to take all of those steps if we're going to end at a product that doesn't absolutely suck ass.
I'm fuming. Okay. One quick thing I'd add also is just in regards to the whole point about. I'm mad now, Haxx. You've distracted me from my point, you fucking prick. So one really important thing about Schwann's analysis is because Schwann
Dictator then.
What?
Nothing.
We got him again.
One important thing I think Schwann also introduced quite a bit is the idea of kind of not just looking at fighters in terms of like attributes, but also in terms of like thinking about weaknesses or like overall like searching for those little areas where maybe this isn't like the area that they're proven in, or maybe this isn't like their area of strength, and kind of asking those hypothetical questions. Because I think asking questions is totally fine as long as you kind of know how to balance those between going like, oh, this guy's defense is bad. What happens entirely? Can you like say if his defense is bad or not based upon who he's fighting? Like, how do you qualify that based upon the data so far? But I think like what Schwann really brings to the table is that he tries to look at attributes and tries to like, they're not necessarily generic statements. They're more just like, this is the things we see. These are the observations that maybe we can draw more from and then make them more interesting or worth having conversations about.
Basically, what this tells me is that we're at a stage where a certain degree of specialization is necessary. It's a very natural process in many fields, I think. I don't think it would be a controversial statement to say that specialization is sort of that sprungs up naturally if the field, and something that needs to be cultivated if the field needs to survive. And it opens up new markets, new directions, and etc., etc. And so, normally, like looking at the type of analysts that we employ at the fight side, the type of analysts we employ is, I would define them as people who, through various theoretical and practical means, try to communicate fighting concepts and explain fighting concepts based on empirical evidence. And the empirical evidence in question is, fight footage. And there are certain, and everyone's methodology is different, but so far, the way we can define the fight side methodology is that we do not use stats, we do not rely on fight metric, and if we do, it's only we only do it after careful scrutiny and in the appropriate context, because obviously, as we already outlined in the beginning, fight metric is extremely flawed and subject to human error, because it's just two guys pushing buttons from a position in which they cannot see the strikes land appropriately, or do not understand what substitutes a significant strike for, even. Like, for example, checked leg kicks and checked body kicks count as significant strikes that have landed in fight metric. If you go back and look at the stats for the Chris Weidman versus Uriah Hall, almost pronounced it like the German way there. If you go back and watch the stats for that fight, what you'll find is that it lists 0 significant strikes landed for Uriah Hall, and 2 significant strikes attempted for Chris Weidman, 1 landed, 50% clip, and 1 significant strike. And what happened in that fight? Chris Weidman, quote-unquote, landed the significant strike and broke his own leg in half. That's what happened. And so, there's like... and I think we are already seeing the various examples of specialization in the field with... people who go for stats, people who go for the approach that we...
Sorry, I need to put my hand up about something.
Yeah, sure.
I need to take offense with the clear derision you had towards Chris Weidman's striking accuracy there. He hit 50% of his strikes, and it led to a fight-ending exchange. That's pretty sure that's Sean O'Malley levels of accuracy. Why are you hating on him?
Yeah, exactly. This is the example of a very fair criticism that everyone at the fight side gets at one point or another. Especially from people like who enjoy stats and people who are bettors, who made lots of money on MMA, so obviously they understand the fight game much better than the so-called analysts. But so this is the main problem with the use of the term analyst, even, because analyst is kind of like... I don't think you can deny that analyst is a bit of a pretentious term, you know? So it gives this air of importance to people who are essentially hobbyists. A lot of us are hobbyists. A lot of us do this because we enjoy this. We enjoy talking about fights. We enjoy breaking down all the technical and nitty-gritty stuff. But none of us. It's a fight analyst is not really, you know, an actual job yet, at least. And it is a job that is. Fight analysts are employed by the UFC and the ESPN in this exact specific, you know, area. And quite frankly, they usually employ analysts based on their credentials, and those credentials are usually had a bunch of fights. And someone like Robin Black, for example, who was prominently featured on many media outlets for his high quality input.
Allow me to take it from here. Pseudo-intellectual bullshit.
Highfalutin analyst nonsense.
Talking about ringcraft and shit. Looky here. We got an
Please
analyst.
support my thesaurus.
I mean, this kind of reinforces another point that I've made once or twice. A common criticism that people have against I don't know, I'm going to put it in quotes again, analysts, is this whole skin in the game thing, which, you know, really just reads to me like these people have read one Nassim Taleb book and have completely, number one, failed to understand that there is a lot of subtlety and complexity that goes into Taleb's actual academic stuff, as opposed to stuff where he's just trying to, you know, push some buttons and get reactions, because he's very good at it. Number two, they've also ignored the fact that a lot of people don't like Taleb as a result, so maybe that's not the approach you want to be going for. Bless Taleb. He's a very entertaining person and very sharp, but he is also very opinionated. But, you know, the third point I'd make is that, you know, there's this weird fucking mentality in mixed martial arts, which I don't understand, which is the only way to have skin in the game is to put money on the line. And that's especially weird for me because I don't know if any of you have paid attention to this thing called mixed martial arts, right? But there's this crazy thing that you can do, and it's called training and fighting. Right? Have you guys heard of that? And like in training and fighting, you get physically hurt and you get punched in the face and you get kicked in the body and you can suffer permanent, potentially life-affecting damage. It also costs you time, which you could be using to, I don't know, just a controversial opinion, work in a career you might be more skilled in and make money. So when I see people saying, you know, you awful analysts with your lack of skin in the game, you fucking loser Ryan Wagner, you don't bet, so you suck dicks. When Ryan has like, what, 35 fights as in MT, has competed in grappling competitions? Like... And some guy on the internet that hasn't had one fucking fight but bets is like, bro, you're not putting anything on the line? Like, please just tie a silk rope around your neck and pull it twice. Like, the gene pool is better off without you.
Yeah, to quote, I almost said the late and great Kyle MacLachlan. But either way, to quote the late, great Kyle MacLachlan,
Rip.
Please end it all. Just... pointless how does he put it? He always puts it in a very particular way. He always phrases it like
log off forever.
yes, something like that, but much more permanently.
Touch grass.
Touch grass is also a good one.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But yeah, like I kind of want to just come full circle with that, because it's like there is different ways that you can show commitment to an idea other than just betting money. People in the fight site, some of them get paid money to write stuff, and the way that they get paid money is from people that are like, hello, I like your content. I am going to provide you with money to keep creating the content. That's skin in the game. Some people have made it clear.
And reputations attached.
Exactly. Some people have put their real life name and voice. That's skin in the game. Some people, like Ed and Seth, have competed in real wrestling teams, which involved getting physically hurt and injuries that have actually affected the quality of their life. That's skin in the game. You know, some people have made it very clear, and I have no reason not to disbelieve them, that the time they spend writing about punching on is time they could be spending on a far more productive job that would earn them a lot more money, doing overtime shifts or whatever. That's skin in the game. So basically, this idea that you can't be a meaningful analyst unless you have something on the line, this in itself is not a terrible idea, and this is an idea that is reflected well in the skin in the game principle that Taleb pushes. But to try and take that complexity and reduce it to, haha bro, what's your betting profile, it's just kind of it's such a limited way of thinking about investment, for starters, right? That I kind of can't take these people seriously when they argue the concept in the first place. It's just, short version, people show investment in different ways. You shouldn't be expecting people to show they're invested in this by just putting money on the line. There are a million ways to show investment. One of the most obvious is by getting punched in the face to learn the sport better. A lot of the people in the fight site clearly do get punched in the face, and that's not me making a joke about the quality of their Twitter feed posting. Give them a little credit, please.
I mean, it's kind of a miracle that I haven't gotten punched in the face for me posting Thanos cock on the TL all the time without any filters, But I did get punched in the face quite a lot during the course of my life, and it wasn't in a competition setting, but at the very least, I know what it feels like to get punched in the face. So I don't feel like comments from people like that are particularly threatening, to my well-being, when I actually have more pertinent things threatening my well-being at this very instance all around me. That's just how I live. But yeah, just back to, I think we veered away from I veered away from my original argument that I was trying to make. It was about specialization and how further development in the fight analysis sphere may lead to the emergence of different types of analysts whose roles are very clearly defined, and it creates less confusion amongst the fan base. Like, this analyst specializes on the specific technical and form breakdowns, the specific mechanics of each technique and strike, or like the biomechanics of how fighters perform certain things. And this analyst specializes on the big picture strategic stuff. On he or she describe the various approaches that a fighter may take in order to win the fight. It's long-term and short-term goals. So they define the methods employed by the fighter in those specific terms, and etc., etc. And to bring examples from other more well-established fields, Operator, do you have any examples off the top of your head on which sort of specializations and how may develop, and how the whole process works from your experience?
I mean, I actually really liked Haxx's example of Schwann as being kind of closer to the substrate, so to speak, to coaches and fighters. Mm-hmm. Because like in physics, so broadly physics is split into experiment and theory. But within theory, there's a huge number of subspecialties. There's kind of the very abstract, very close to being pure mathematics stuff, and then there's a class of theory that's what we call phenomenological. And I'm still oversimplifying for the purposes of the explanation, but whatever. But the phenomenologists are very close to experimentalists. Like, they're the sort of people that digest some aspects of the formal theory to interface with the people on the ground building the experiments, to guide how the experiment should be designed, towards making possible predictions based on very concrete models. So it's kind of a much more getting your hands dirty, constructing possible models, down-to-earth form of theory, as opposed to the very kind of high-level abstract mathematical stuff, which builds these large frameworks that then kind of filter down towards experiment, towards these concrete predictions. So just like there's
in plain
levels
English. Like, could you do a plain English explanation, or because I have one, but I want to see if you've earned the right to say yours first.
A plain English explanation of which part of it, or the whole thing?
Of yeah, kind of the whole thing as a concept.
I can I can say something, and you can tell me how close it is to plain English or not. I have trouble gauging my own plain English.
No, you should have a crack. There's no better opportunity than to do it than now. I reckon take a swing.
Yeah, so basically there's you could be the sort of theorist that works on basic frameworks. Like, how do we understand how particles collide together? How do we compute these processes? What general features do our computations have? Like, basically, what is the mathematical language upon which the universe is built? Or you could be the sort of theorist that says, okay, I want to know what sort of species of particles, what kinds of particles might show up if we build a big collider that crashes them together precisely at this energy. And if I make a little toy model with these assumptions, then I predict that that there's like this probability of this species of particles coming up if we crash things together at these energies. But they would have needed input from kind of the first sort of theorist, the very mathematical theorist, so that they would know how to do the computations to make those predictions in the first place. Those were the two levels. Was that plain Englishy or no?
Yeah, it's funny because I'm now. You can probably guess whose explanation I'll be quoting, or you might be able to take a crack at it. But I was going to say, if you really want to go to gutter level English, you can kind of describe those people as people whose job it is to connect all the really cool shit they're doing with actual machines, with all the abstract shit nobody understands that's supposed to, capture the universe in a bubble. Because really, that's it. You're trying to you're trying to take the theories from the top and connect it to stuff that we can actually see. Oh dear. Because, let's be honest, most people can't conceptualize stuff they can't see, and it's kind of why I'm glad we've actually got into a discussion about physics here, because let's go damage, right? Damage is one of those things that gets taken apart and deconstructed and argued so much. And if you really think about it, for the average person that's never trained in particular and never been hit by a body punch and doesn't understand how in the 5th round getting hit by a whacker of a body punch affects your stance, makes you hesitate, makes the, ultra sharp jab that you've been throwing for 5 rounds start dipping a little bit, there's a weakness in your shoulder. If you don't see all of those things because you have the tactile understanding that all three of you have spoken about, the gap between your understanding of why that punch did more damage on you and why it should count as more damage and why it should score is as deep between you and a theoretical physicist plumbing the corners of the universe. In the end, the fact is that the average person can't see either, and they're both equally confusing.
Oh, for fuck's sake. Ugh.
Yeah, or maybe even another more down-to-earth example is, I'm very good at figuring out what kind of mathematics one needs to develop a theory in the abstract. I can't put shit on a computer and tell you how many particles will come out of a collider experiment with what probability. Like, I can't code for shit, for example. There are well-defined theoretical physicists with that kind of computational bridge rule. They can take the shit, put it on a computer, program it, and make numbers come out. I don't like numbers. I'm a symbols person. So you need people that can interface between the symbols people and the experimentalists.
There's probably also a point there worth noting that one of the reasons that physics is an idea to try and translate, MMA has kind of come up in this discussion a few times, is we use mathematics for clarity, and a lot of people go, what the fuck? I look at math and it makes no sense. But one of the great things about mathematics is, while understanding mathematics is not easy, particularly if you do not have training in it, one of the few advantages of mathematics over words is that there is only one way to interpret a mathematical expression. Okay, people will argue that based on their understanding. I'm about to get hit by 1,000 different philosophers. But, when you state your assumptions mathematically, there is very little room for debate as to what you are actually stating. On the other hand, people are still punching each other in the face, shooting guns at each other, bombing each other, and having really, really nasty, hurtful words on Twitter over what Karl Marx actually meant, because he took the effort to fucking express his opinions in words. So there's always that ambiguity there.
Yeah, and certainly mathematics are able to take away and limit a lot of the confusion that happens whenever someone tries to communicate using plain spoken language. But how would you really apply mathematics to fighting? In this case, is I think the logical question. Dead silence. I think I would say one thing.
Hysterical laughter.
Yeah.
I would say one thing.
Lies, damn lies, and statistics.
I think there's. I think for now, I think it would be fair to say that we are limited by the amount of technology that we have, by the level of technology that we have right now, or rather, by the ability to implement the technology that already exists. At a level where it would make sense to start using mathematics as opposed to spoken language and written language. For example, things like pressure sensors and things like specific smart cameras and all that. You get where I'm going with this.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I've said this before, one of the reasons that we can econometrics the fuck out of baseball is because baseball has so many components of it that are objective. If you hit, now I don't know what the distance is, it may be different across different arenas, I have no fucking idea, please don't stab me in an alleyway, baseball nerds, I don't want to be killed with 1,000 protractors. But the point is, if you hit the ball far enough, right? It's objectively a run, yes? I understand that much about baseball. There's no disputing it, there's no subjectivity, it simply is like that. And secondly, no matter how long it takes, at the end, the game of baseball will end at a certain period of time when you have more points than the other team. MMA can't even get to that fucking stage because we don't know when half the fights end. And we have no way of objectively measuring your success because strike counts are not objective because they do not include the damage, whereas the process of getting a home run includes both the objectivity, it's a point, and you get it by reaching a point that isn't disputed. It's not two dudes hitting a CompuBox statistic, it's holy shit, you hit this thing X distance, it's no longer in the field. But that also includes the damage. It's not just that you hit it far enough to get the point, it's that 1 point is worth 1 point. One strike is not always worth one strike. How the fuck do you measure that? So yeah, that's what stops the mathematization of combat sports, so to speak.
Yeah, and to point out an obvious thing, in case some of the listeners get confused. And I'm used to trying to make statements like this, just in case. There is an objective moment where the fight ends. It's when the fighter gets finished. And so, to prevent further confusion, I have to state this. But yeah, really, this just brings us to the question of, the question of how one can assess damage, and it's really a whole topic in itself. what one should look out for in order to assess damage, and it's going to be inherently subjective, naturally. But once again, there is a certain degree of objectivity you can bring into it through whether using your own personal experience fighting or through watching tons of fights where lots of, basically hundreds of rounds of fighting. You keep watching footage for hundreds of hours, and then you start recognizing certain patterns that happen, that present themselves when fighters get damaged enough throughout the fight. Things like the mouth opening, they begin slowing down once again, and as Haxx pointed out, like their previously extremely sharp jab starts dipping a little bit, or based on your understanding of body mechanics and punch mechanics, you start understanding which sort of punch would create a particular type of damage and how damaging it would be when it connects on someone, on a live target. But either way, it's still going to be immensely subjective, and it's still going to be rely basically on one's experience and one's understanding of the footage that he or she has watched during the course of, once again, hundreds of upon hundreds of hours. And so it's kind of we're still at a stage where it all depends strictly on on the amount of effort you put into doing research, and it's all going to be filtered through an extreme amount of various biases that the said person, the person in question may have. So once again, the problem of this broken game of telephone for now is probably going to be unavoidable. But I think we've done a pretty good job of outlining how we can establish communications in such a way as to leave as little room for misunderstanding as possible right now, as of this juncture.
Basically, what we're advocating for is to outfit all fighters in Tron suits that are like covered with sensors and cameras and measure the fuck out of everything. This is the MMA of the future. It's the future we all need.
Everyone is going to wear mocap suits, and it's all going to be simulated, and it's going to be boring as fuck. This is what we're advocating.
That's what John Jones is actually preparing for. Haven't you seen him wearing all of those futuristic camo and ghillie suits?
He's
ahead
no
of his
idea
time.
how many cameras are hidden beneath those leaves.
Well, I would go as
Thousands.
far as to say that John Jones actually fights as if they're both wearing a mocap suit, both him and his opponent, and that they're covered in sensors, and he trusts those sensors so much that he is willing to actually lose fights.
Personally, I just thought John Jones was cosplaying his cousin It, but I guess I was wrong.
And John Jones is basically cosplaying. I mean, John Jones is not that dumb for trying to learn how to survive in the harsh world of 2035, which is...
I'm pretty sure you can
in
delete
the
out
bowels
that
of Jackson
sentence.
Wink.
in the
Net negative. He's always fighting with a handicap.
I politely disagree. I think you're all wrong. I think the reason John Jones is putting on ghillie suits and getting guns is that, like, with the amount of roids that's been pushed into his body, pretty sure the fucking drug department's going to kick the door down, so he may as well be prepared to shoot back.
He's going to disappear within the next few years and going to reappear in the Alaskan rainforest in 2015. In 2050,
I'll go up to heavyweight.
that's when he will
Out of his
reveal
mind,
himself
fat.
as having gone up to heavyweight, and this is what it takes to become a UFC heavyweight. You have to go insane and become insanely fat.
I beat a Muay Thai black belt.
Sorry, part of me really hopes that, like, for some reason, him and DC never bury the hatchet and they try and fight each other as 55-year-old men. And, like, I really hope DC...
obese at that point.
That's why I'm low-key hoping they fight, like, because DC, he stays a bit chubby, but, like, you know, he's always been a bit of a rotund fellow, so he just bears it better at 55. Like, just ends the fight in the first round with hammer fists from the top because Jones can't deal with being fat. His tiny legs just break under the strap.
God, what a dream fight to commentate. Like, DC appears to be rolling towards Jones, cutting off the cage very effectively in his new weight class.
DC's final form, as Seth would say, he's harnessed the pallies of Italian and become the Pokemon Golem. I don't know what Pokemon Jones would look like, but it'd probably be funny.
Pokemon Jones is going to be some kind of like his main power, his primary power would be to be able to call backup, and in this case I mean the cops. He's going to be a support character. And
the last thing Jones says before DC knocks his lights out is just Nowitzki, help me.
Yeah, and like the primary problem with that is he's going to be like an F tier support character, because all his attempts to call the cops or all attempts to call backup have a 50% chance of backfiring on the person who actually called the cops. And by backfiring, I mean it's in the most literal sense possible. They're literally going to be fired upon.
As this discussion's been going on and us rooting for DC to knock Joe's out, a Dan Martin has suddenly looked into the horizon going, something's wrong.
I mean, yeah.
No, I think even Dan would back DC over Jones, honestly. Like, people think Danny's job is to be the DC hater, but you guys don't understand how much he hates Jones more. Like, holy shit.
As we've shown in our nuanced discussion of analysis, context is important. We only hate DC when he's not fighting John Jones in this fictitious heavyweight old man contest.
I mean, yeah, basically. Essentially, I think one of the primary reasons for why Danny Martin and a lot of us actually dislike DC is because, beyond the obvious reasons, being a corporate show, yes, is also something that could have been, the perennial white whale of any fight fan is a good heavyweight, and DC could have been that. He could have been decent, and he could have beaten Jones with the attributes that he has. It's just that he does not have the skill set to back those attributes, and that's the primary problem with it.
I would also say that I think the DC Jones fight is still a genuinely great way to think about analysis, because DC can be incredibly insightful, more insightful and more self-aware than Jones has ever been in his life when he talks about certain things about fights. So this is something that I did a tweet thread about. DC talks about ringcraft as a commentator in, I think, an extremely... what would the word be? I'm going to say efficient, because I don't want to sound like I think DC's doing a bad job. I don't think he's doing a bad job. Something maybe that I neglected to mention earlier was that because when you're commentating, you're operating on a time scale, right? You don't have the time to get across complex concepts quickly. And I think when DC's at his best, he explains ringcraft quite well. The thing is, when DC gets emotional, or DC gets invested, or DC, for lack of a better word, gets angry, woo, all of that, all of that perspective and that analysis flies out the window. He's a fighter who, when he gets emotionally invested, he doesn't fight as well. Jones probably doesn't have the level of self-awareness that DC has ever had, but because Jones is able to be focused in the fight and keep his head about him, he's usually able to do enough to get over the line. And he's kind of built an aura now that even when I feel he has pretty clearly lost, he gets away with it from the judges, and to Jones's credit, he's very good at playing to that to win a fight.
Yeah, and really, we've talked for 120 minutes already, and granted, a good 30 minutes of that was just random bullshit, but this really brings us to the question of how does a fight analyst really break down a fighter in a way that makes sense and eliminates as many biases as possible. And someone like Tyron Woodley is a great example of that. Like, many people have, especially, the Tyron Woodley fans that have rooted for him for a long time, they always bring up things like credentials and things like stats to defend Tyron Woodley when based on empirical evidence, his actual fights, and based on what is considered to be the baseline level of skill in fighting and the fundamentals of fighting. Tyron Woodley isn't all that hot. But since he has a title reign, he has title defenses, and he has certain credentials, people tend to flock to those things as an example, as a proof of the fact of what is in their mind a fact that Tyron Woodley is actually, an all-time great or an elite fighter or whatever. But I think this warrants an entire discussion in itself. But to sort of set up and lay the groundwork for the next for the follow-up episode to this discussion, Haxx, what do you think are the primary things that we need to outline here when we talk about fighters like Tyron Woodley or DC or John Jones, or general, just whenever you try to offer criticism about a fighter's game or style or career, or evaluate their career in general?
I think the key is have a system of analysis that you make, if not clear, because it's not always easy to be clear, that you make transparent. Have a system, state your biases clearly, and I think above all else, try and capture some of the humanity of a fighter, not just because you should to not be a dickhead, but because it is important to remember human limitations. Something that I think many people on the fight site have been guilty of at times, but I think to a much greater degree people who have repeated arguments we have made, is they have ignored that there is only so many things a fighter at top level competition can focus on and refine at once. Many fighters are genuinely doing the best they can to improve, they just do not have the time. So if you have that system and you have those biases and you have those assumptions and you state it all clearly, you move from a place where you say something like, I think DC is trash because he never developed lateral movement, which is a bad take, to I think that it is frustrating for me to watch DC because I think if he had been able to add lateral movement to his game and a second defensive layer, I cannot think of a single fight he had been in where he would not have been a heavy favourite. That, I think, is analysis that captures that you are not shitting on DC, you are frustrated because of the wasted potential, and nobody likes to see, jokes aside, somebody being punched in the face that many times when they could fight in a way where they don't get punched in the face as many times.
Yeah, I'll add a bit to the process thing. So the whole thing with learning analysis, like I said, always comes down to like being measured, but also like always having like that what so what kind of formula, or just generically, what am I seeing and why is it important? And just making that connective tissue between those two things is going to help you not only explain to the audience or whomever you're explaining it to, but it's also going to help people kind of see what you're seeing. And so it's like a good instance is like, I was helping someone a while back, like analyze Sean O'Malley, and I was like, here's the things I see from O'Malley that kind of give me pause for concern. Because it's like, oh, I see how this guy has so much space to work. What happens if he doesn't have that space? What does he look like then? That kind of creates reason to be skeptical. Asking what-if questions can be a little risky because you don't want to jump to assumptions immediately, but it introduces different scenarios and starts to help you think outside the box about it. And just starting to ask questions, like I said, that's kind of something that works for me specifically. Just kind of paying attention to situations, and another thing is never pay attention to everything at once, because otherwise you're just going to overwhelm yourself. Start with like the smaller patterns, see how those little things connect, and then start coming to conclusions that you can explain to other people. And once again, like Haxx said, always explain those biases, because hell, everyone has biases. You're not going to like everything that everyone else likes, but as long as you're acknowledging that, that can at least lend some credibility for people to want to listen to you.
Yeah, and I think to build off of both of those points, if you have a clear and transparent method for analyzing a certain fighter's game, I think it's useful to outline various scenarios, based on this analysis and the observations that I've made about this fighter's game. Here is how I think they would react if they faced an opponent that had such and such game. Here's how I think their game would fare against a variety of different scenarios. And of course, many of those scenarios might not end up being tested because fighters only fight so many fights and they only have so many, opponents in their weight class available. But at least if you do that in a principled enough way, then your analysis is going to be subjected to some tests, some experimental tests when they actually meet fighters of a particular style. And then based on the outcome of that, you can start to refine, upgrade, see where you were right, see where you were wrong, and iterate from there.
The last thing I'll say is also, within a set orthodoxy, you're going to get a bunch of exceptions. So occasionally you'll see maybe a bunch of MMA fighters do something, but then someone else comes along and they do something different, And maybe at first you have skepticism whether or not it works, but it still does. And don't just immediately dismiss it as going like, well, this guy kind of just randomly explodes and does stuff. Maybe there's a different process going on. Maybe there's a different explanation. And I am talking kind of about guys like Yoel Romero or maybe like Khabib Nurmagomedov, who maybe just approach like different subsets of things. But context also matters too. You have to consider their division. You have to consider their competition. And then you start narrowing down those little things here or there to explain how they work. But context matters, thinking about exceptions matters, thinking outside the box matters.
I'd also add one more thing, and that is, if, don't not put a thought out, don't not have a thought. Like, well, what I mean by that is, look, there are two options. If you think something, if you have an analytical process behind something that you can write down and you have a thought, like, I don't know. So let's have an upcoming fight. I think TJ would do or perform X against Aljo. And you have that thought and you feel quite strongly about that thought. Don't not fucking put it out there. Don't not try and make that thought a concept, because there are two ways it can go. You have a prediction and you get it wrong, and you've written down the reasons why you've got it wrong, and you can remember the reasons why you predicted that way. Now you've learned something. The alternative is you never go through that stage. You never go through the prediction. You never put the thought out there. Well, now you haven't fucking learned anything because you haven't fucking put anything on the line. Part of getting better is making hypotheses and testing them. So you need to actually do that by making them. So make them. Just don't be a dick about it and have a clear and transparent process for why you made the prediction you made.
So what I'm getting from this is something I've hit upon myself, but something that needed to be stated in something that your experiences offer to make those statements hit the same points from different angles and sort of like enrich the overall idea. But yeah, main takeaway is basically just state your biases. Don't be afraid to admit upfront that you don't like such and such things. Don't like a particular style, or find yourself not enjoying a particular style, etc., or a technique. And second of all, be nuanced. Fighting is about doing lots of little things really well, and the same applies to analysis as well. And so, trying to think of a concept from many different angles and from and try and put that idea in different context in your mind to sort of like maybe find different facets to it is essential. And in the end, being afraid of being wrong is the primary reason for why you may find yourself not progressing or plateauing. Because a lot of people online a lot of online discourse seems to be focused on dunking on wrong takes, dunking on stupid takes, and making fun of people who are wrong, or making fun of people who are not quite right, etc. You're not going to improve if you are afraid of being wrong. I mean, being afraid of being wrong, a certain level of that healthy caution is necessary to not make stupid statements all the time, but also there needs to be... Basically what I'm saying is there needs to be a balance between wanting to hit a nail on the head and being confident in yourself and not being afraid to put out a statement that may not prove to be correct in the end. But yeah, certainly a topic that we can wank each other off about for hours on end. But I think we've pretty much hit all the points that we wanted, that we set out in the beginning, and we have laid the groundwork for a follow-up discussion where we may examine actual particular examples and sort of like narrow the whole thing down to something more specific than just broad statements about how one can approach analysis and how one can communicate analysis. But I guess to summarize, a healthy amount of cooperation between everyone is necessary to make this community better, and it's okay to specialize in certain things. You don't have to know and understand everything to be able to offer something of value to the discourse, so about MMA and about combat sports in general. Same applies to fighting itself. It's okay to specialize in things, and it's okay to have, and that's why fighters with very well developed camps have different coaches for different stuff, because a coach cannot know everything, and if a person like this exists, they may well be a candidate for being the best coach in the world. But it's kind of like an ephemeral ideal at the moment. But either way, my point is, I think as the sport develops, we're going to see more specialization in every facet of the sport. We're going to see certain people who are better at perhaps breaking down concepts in a plain, easy to understand way. Perhaps there are going to be analysts who actually train themselves, or perhaps they're going to be fighters who have an analytical minds. Certainly, we have examples from combat sports history of fighters who actually think about fighting in the same way, let's say, an analyst will. And we're going to see lots of facets, lots of different people going for different things, and it's all going to be all right. It's going to be fine. It's great for development of the sport, but it is essential to sort of prepare for that by perhaps laying the groundwork. Perhaps people who are generalists when it comes to analysis, and people who are good at communicating with other people should perhaps think more about creating more collaborative works and cooperating in the future. And I think that's the primary strength of the Fight Site as an outlet, in that we're actually a fight analysis hub. We're a think tank, and not just a hive mind, as some people tend to paint us as. Certainly there is a big degree of overlap in our opinions, because we gravitated towards one another fairly organically, because we're friends. And but yeah, recognizing that there's going to be a great deal of bias in that respect, and sort of like trying our best to curtail their effect on our takes and our output is certainly necessary. And I think we've done a good job so far, and we're only going to improve, because well, as we've stated many times, we're not afraid of being wrong a lot of the time, because look at our staff picks. Sometimes we just make a pick just so it's not homogeneous, because that's how strong the criticism is, that the Fight Site is a hive mind. So we just kind of like feel the need to overshoot and overcorrect a little bit. Sometimes the things we say need not be taken as at face value. Sometimes it's just hypotheticals that we put out there in order to test our ideas and in order to cover as much ground as possible. That's how you learn. That's how you actually test your ideas. You put them out. Even if you don't have a great deal of belief in them, and you see whether they're wrong or not. But yeah. So, any parting thoughts? I guess you've summarized your ideas fairly extensively. Perhaps something you wish to get off your chest before we wrap this up? Nope.
I was just going to say, your summary there was a very polite way of saying, if the Heavy Hands boys don't listen to everything I've told them to fix, I swear to God I'm going to corner them in a dark alleyway and kill them in front of their family. So,
It was implied, yes. There was a certain degree of implication there. Yeah, operator, any parting thoughts? Any?
Don't go to Jackson Wing.
I mean, yeah, sure. That's good advice at any stage. Yeah, essentially.
Yeah, be observational. Be as observational as possible. Pay attention, and be fearless, as Haxx was saying. Just put stuff out there. Experiment. Try it out.
Just don't be so fearless as to, actually say really, really, really dumb shit. Just think about it for a moment.
Be fearless after observing and coming up with some kind of
yes.
Observe first, fearless actor.
Dan?
Nah, I'm good. Just like watching this sport for reasons you like to watch it, and don't feel like you have to watch it to analyze it, but do understand that some people do, and hopefully this at least sheds clarity on why we do it.
Yeah, essentially, like, if you understand the sport better, you gain a lot more enjoyment from it, in my opinion. If you actually understand what is happening on the screen, I think there's a certain degree of intellectual fulfillment that you may get out from this sport that you may not necessarily gain if you just watch it for the violence or just watch it for the certain figures that you like. There's much more to offer. MMA has much more to offer on than simple man punch man and men throw men on the ground. All that kind of stuff. Although certainly it can be really fun.
Somebody get Yod to Photoshop Tumen's face onto that classic, like, that scene. MMA has layers, and he's just pointing to the board with all the different ideas and concepts on it.
No, you know what he should do? He should Photoshop me on Shrek. That's what I'm saying, essentially. MMA has layers, and analysts have layers, and everyone has layers. Fighters also have layers. So, and so the princess wasted away in the tower, waiting for her prince to save her from dumb shit takes on Twitter.
Okay. I think we're done. I think we're done.
Yeah, I mean, we're done when I say we're done, Dictator Dan. So please refrain from further comment on this issue. But actually, yes, I think I think that's enough of that for today. There's more where that came from. Look forward to the next episode of TENGRIDOME. This has been TENGRIDOME episode 19. Communicating fight analysis and analytical concepts. With me today were Dan Albert, at TypewritingDA on Twitter. Check him out. He always posts interesting stuff. He always makes, if not Twitter threads, at least he hints at the stuff that he's writing at any moment, and he usually writes really good stuff. I'm yet to see Dan write something that's shit. He doesn't write shit. He writes the shit. Also, I've been joined by HaXxorIzed at HaXxorIzed on Twitter, and he also has lots of comments to offer on the sport, especially when fights are happening live and he watches them, and then he immediately fires off the hip with somehow with sniper accuracy, despite coming up with things to say off the top of his head. And operator at it's at doc_0p_. Describe the comments, the contents of your Twitter, operator, please.
It's mostly weird shit posting and elaborate jokes. I've only been on Twitter for a month, so the content may evolve. You should really just follow me and see where we go on this magical journey together.
You spent one day on Twitter, and within the first 24 hours, you already put out a tweet that reached 1,000 likes. So I'd say you have a knack for this, as you have a knack for podcasting, pretty much. I don't think this has been painful for us in any way, and I'm not sure if it was painful for you, but I think you've done a great job, so thank you for joining us and finding the time to join us. And looking forward to more collaborations in the future. But yeah, you know who I am, and newer listeners who came here after my appearance on Heavy Hands, where I sabotaged the entire show and made Connor wanna quit this job and pick up something more fulfilling, like I don't know, like sewing and sewing, that kind of stuff. You may find me on at ChungusKhan03, and this is what I normally do. I don't actually I haven't made it a career out of going on other people's shows and sabotaging the entire show and taking over them. Although it was fun, it was pretty fun, and if some of you still haven't listened to it, please check it out. It's Heavy Hands episode It's the episode on Cyril Gunn and Jose Aldo, the UFC 265 post-fight breakdown. Check it out, and check out the Fight Side, subscribe to our Patreon, and we put out lots of content there, alternate commentaries, as Dan has mentioned, various exclusive podcasts, exclusive fight breakdowns, and we also have a Discord community, which you may join for as little as $5 per month, and what you gain is a direct line of access to our staff, primarily me, because I'm extremely active there, and the ability to converse with other like-minded fight fans. If you're particularly tired of MMA Twitter and RMMA, or perhaps even the Instagram MMA community, which is just a world unto itself. So you may ask me questions that may turn into entire podcast episodes, and where I examine the question and try to answer the question as in depth as possible, and bring on guests that have that I feel like have a particular degree of expertise that may allow them to answer the question in as exacting detail as possible. And in fact, Operator joined us for this podcast precisely because she's a Discord patron. So, who knows? If you have something interesting to offer, you may get the opportunity to express it. And that's I'd say that's enough for the day. Check out the Fight Side, check out the Patreon, I've plugged everything. Check out the YouTube channels, check out the plugs. And that's it. We're done. Goodbye. 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 Goodbye.